Hi, my name is John Kelsey. I'm National Trainer for Hard Hat Industry Solutions. This is a session from our Red Rhino Academy, our complete training course in electrical and structured cabling estimating using Red Rhino software. Welcome to our session, How to Take Off Branch Circuits. In this session, we cover how to do a material takeoff for branch circuit conduits, and then enter the materials into Red Rhino estimating software. This session is geared toward electrical estimating. If you've not watched our session, How to Take Off Conduit, please watch that session first. This one is more advanced and builds on the previous session. There's a difference between doing branch circuit material takeoff and feeder takeoff. By definition, branch circuits use conduit which is 1 inch or smaller, whereas feeder conduit uses conduits in sizes 1.25 inches and larger. Using Red Rhino estimating software, the real time-saving feature is that you can enter multiple conduit runs all at the same time. In this example, we will take off and input several branch circuit conduits running simultaneously. To complete the training session, I'll be using a project drawing, Red Rhino material takeoff sheet, and a ScaleX to measure the conduit run on the drawing. If you do not own a ScaleX, you should get one. You can buy them easily online. Let's take a closer look at the project drawing we will use. The drawing shows a top view of a building containing one electrical panel with branch circuit conduits feeding receptacles on the wall. There are several different sizes of EMT conduit, plus 12-2 and 12-3 MC cable runs. I will demonstrate how to take off the conduits and transfer the information to Red Rhino. To better understand what the two-dimensional drawing represents, I'll also use a three-dimensional drawing of the same building. This is not a view you'd normally have available on your project blueprints, but we will use it because it shows how the conduit runs out the top of the panels to the junction boxes. From the junction boxes, the circuits extend via MC cable to the devices. Blueprints do not give us three-dimensional detail, but oftentimes when a drawing shows a home run, it shows it with a curly Q arrow illustrating which circuits are running home or to the panel. I will use a three-dimensional drawing to assist in explaining how the conduit is installed. When doing a conduit takeoff, you must include the length of the conduit risers. This was explained in previous sessions. Refer to them if you do not know what a conduit riser is. Here are the conduit risers, which are the conduit that runs out the top of the panel and outlets. Conduit risers are not depicted on normal blueprint or drawings, but you must account for them. I'll account for the conduit risers by overrolling the ScaleX, and I'll show you what I mean in a minute. These are the risers right here. Now let's consider conduit elbows or 90-degree bends. You do not take off elbows for branch circuits. This is one difference between a takeoff for branch conduit and takeoff for feeder conduit. Branch conduit elbows are field bent, so do not take them off or enter them into Red Rhino. Next, we will need to consider wire makeup for branch circuits takeoff. Wire makeup is the length of wire needed to extend past the end of the conduit to the termination point. Wire makeup must be included to capture the wire cost. In this case, at the electrical panel, the wire would extend past the end of the conduit and terminate on the circuit breakers. At the junction boxes, the wire must extend out far enough to make up the devices. In electrical panels, the makeup should be about 3 feet, at junction boxes about 1 foot. To calculate the wire makeup length, you use the average length of both ends, so in this example, we would set our makeup at 2 feet. Next, we'll take a look at the material takeoff form. It is filled out with conduit information shown on the drawing. You can see the material descriptions we have discussed. I'll explain more about the drawing in a minute. I would like to mention thoughts on doing takeoff for branch circuits. First, I just want to say this. Branch circuits are somewhat painstaking to take off. You'll probably just not fly through it. It takes time and it can be tedious work. Just take your time and make sure that you're accurate, be as accurate as possible. Another thing is this. I always use a highlighter and mark the conduit runs on the blueprints after I roll them off. Lastly, usually there is junction boxes needed in conduit runs, and junction boxes are oftentimes not shown on the drawings. When I know that a junction box should be included and it's not shown on the blueprint, I draw it on the let me say it again. I draw a picture of the junction box, just a little square on the blueprints, and I include the junction box on my material takeoff form. Now, returning to the drawing, but before you start, set up the scale X to the scale which matches your project drawings. Pretend my computer pointer is a scale X while I demonstrate how to do the takeoff or roll off the takeoff using a scale X. Since several conduits on this drawing are the same conduit size and type and the same number of conductors, I can take them off and enter them into Red Rhino in one entry using the Conduit Wizard. I take off conduit at right angles and allow enough conduit to go around obstacles or obstructions in the building. I also allow for risers length by over-rolling past the end of the conduit run. When you roll past, it adds extra length on the scale X count. For consistency, I take off branch conduit in a specific order. I start by taking off EMT conduit, then I take off all the MC cable. Now it doesn't matter what order you do the takeoff, just as long as you do the same order every time. Gives you consistency. I just circled the circuits that I'll be taking off first. I'm going to roll off circuits A7 and A9 and A12. Notice that I overroll slightly to cover the length of the conduit riser. The conduit goes vertically out of the outlets to the panel. Also notice how I overroll the path of the conduit at right angles, or I should say, notice how I roll the path of the conduit at right angles. I do not need to take off couplings, connectors, or supports. Red Rhino will add those materials for us. It's important to understand that I measure and record or write down on the takeoff sheet the total run length of all runs of the same size and number of conductors. Next, I write the footage calculated by the scale X on the takeoff sheet, reset the scale X to 0, and get ready to measure the next run. Since I'm using a virtual scale X, you can't see the length it measured, but here it is on the takeoff sheet. I wrote it down. Let me get there. There's the takeoff sheet. I wrote down 330 feet a half-inch EMT with 3 number 12s. Again, notice on the left side under material column it's shown half-inch EMT with 3 number 12s. And to the right of that is the number of feet, which is 330. Below that, I write the number of runs, which is 2. Next is the makeup length of 2 feet, and finally the application, which is 10 feet, meaning the conduit is to be run above 10 feet off the floor. At the far right, the totals are displayed under the total quantity column. Now we're going to go back to the drawing to measure the next run. I make sure to reset the scale X to 0 to measure the next conduit runs. I notice that the conduit feeding circuits A2 and A4 plus circuits A6 and A8 would require half-inch EMT conduit with 4 number 12 wires, so I take that off next. I'll circle it here, so I'll take off those runs next. When all the half-inch EMT conduits are taken off, I start on 3/4 inch conduits. You get my point here? You take off each conduit size with different numbers of conductors, but you take off all like-for-like conduits with the same size and type wires all at one time. When using Red Rhino Wizard or Conduit Wizard, you can input thousands of feet of conduit simultaneously in just a few seconds. You can literally input all the half-inch EMT conduit runs with 3 number 12 wires for the entire job in one single entry into Red Rhino. I know I'm belaboring this point, but if you understand how to take off branch circuit conduit correctly, you'll double your estimating speed when estimating projects. Again, I roll the scale X over the path of the conduit at a right angle and overroll slightly to cover the conduit riser. This time I'm going to say that the total run length of half-inch conduit, and I'll roll those both off with 4 number 12 wires, is 210 feet long. Next, I write the information on the takeoff sheet. I won't show you the takeoff sheet at this time because I'm sure you get it from previous examples. Once all the half-inch EMT is completed, I move on to 3/4 runs, and I take off circuits 1, 3, and 5 next. I will not demonstrate how to roll it off because I think you have enough examples of rolling off EMT conduit. I make the entry on the takeoff sheet for 130 feet of 3/4 inch EMT with 5 number 12s. Next, I measure the MC cable. Let's say the conduit feeding from outlet to outlet on the drawings is MC cable. I roll it off the same as EMT conduit. I roll off all the 12-2 MC cable, then the 12-3 and 12-4 and so on. I write down the total run length on the material takeoff sheet as well, showing the number of runs in application. I will not demonstrate taking off the MC cable, but show you the results on the takeoff sheet here. So here you'll see the MC cable below the material column, which is MC cable sizes and number of runs. On the takeoff sheet, I write 160 feet of number 12-2 with 6 runs of MC cable and 105 feet of 12-3 with 2 runs. Over at the right, under the total quantity column, you enter the total length. I do not add makeup to MC cable. Makeup length applies to the amount of wire coming out of the end of the conduit only. Instead, I overroll slightly to add length for the extra MC cable needed. This concludes our takeoff portion. Now we'll move to Red Rhino. Now I'll assume you've watched training sessions before on conduit takeoff. From the home page below Estimate and Proposal, I click List Estimates. This is the estimate list. I click on the estimate that I want to work on, Sample Estimate How to Take Off Branch Circuits. Rhino navigates me to the estimate. The section name is called Sample Section Branch Circuits. I click on Edit Takeoff to start inputting materials into Red Rhino. Again, here's the takeoff sheet. I'll enter each run separately, starting with half-inch EMT conduit with 3 number 12 wires, or in this case, 330 feet of conduit and 2 runs. I'll now use the Conduit Wizard. I click on the Wizard's arrow and select Conduit Wizard. There, click on the arrow to the right of the Conduit Wizard and the Conduit Wizard pop-up appears. This is where the conduit run information is entered from the takeoff sheet. I click on the material drop-down and select EMT. I check and see that the size drop-down is already set at ½ inch. Below the size drop-down it says EMT fittings. I'm going to leave the setting at SS diecast, which means set screw diecast type fittings. Next, at the top right of the pop-up, I click the Find button. That populates the correct material down below products. I set the application at plus 10 feet like the conduit is to be installed above 10 feet off the floor. Again, applications refer to the level of difficulty a conduit run, and the program has more labor built in for more difficult runs. In the run length box, I type in 330 for the total footage of the conduit. I click in the number of runs box and type in the number 2. Next, since the wire drop-down is already set for number 12 stranded, and that's the size of wire I want to input, I click on the number box to the right and type in 3 for 3 wires. I click in the makeup box and enter 2 feet for makeup length. I do not enter elbows for branch conduit because they're field bent or bent out in the field. Next, at the top of the pop-up, I click the Add button. This will populate the materials to the takeoff sheet. Next, I click Save to save my work. Save buttons at the top of the page. Now, this is what was entered. I have explained all this in previous sessions. Red Rhino shows the price of each item with extended price and shows the total labor at the far right it takes to install the total materials. The Conduit Wizard adds couplings, connectors, and supports and the total footage of wire needed. Here's another important point. Every time you make an entry, check that entry to make sure it's reasonable. Check every line entered to ensure the labor hours and material prices make sense based on your experience. This program does not know how your crew will perform when installing. It is designed to show results which can be adjusted based on your good judgment. If you look at the total labor and extended labor and determine that it would take more time to do this installation of conduit and pull the wire, then you would add labor. You would do so by clicking the Add Labor button. I won't demonstrate the other EMT runs, as I believe you understand how to do them from this demonstration. Now back to the takeoff sheet for further explanation of how to use the takeoff form. In order to keep track of what has been input into Rhino and what is not, I check off the items at the far right of the page. Next, I'll demonstrate how to input the MC cable into Red Rhino. The takeoff sheet shows 160 feet of 12-2 MC cable and 6 runs. I'll now use the Conduit Wizard to input the MC cable. I get the Conduit Wizard on my screen. I click on the material drop-down and select MC. Next, I click the size drop-down. You will notice that here the MC cables are located at the bottom. There's 12-2, 12-3, 12-4, 10-2, 10-3, etc. I'll select number 12-2 cable. Next, at the top right hand of the pop-up, I click Find. Again, that populates the correct materials down below. This time I set the application at normal because the MC cable is below 6 feet from the floor. Again, applications refer to how conduit is to be installed. The program has additional labor built in for more difficult conduit runs. I click in the run length box and type in 160 for the total footage of MC cable. I click the number of runs box and type in the number 6. I do not have to deal with the wire drop-downs for sizing wire or with the makeup box. I leave them as is. Note that the supports default is 5 feet, so the program is going to add a support for every 5 feet of MC cable. Next, at the top of the page, I click the Add button. This will populate the materials to the takeoff sheet. You've seen this all before. And then click the Save button to save our work. I won't demonstrate inputting the 12-3 MC cable because you already saw an example of the 12-2. It works the same. With this, we conclude our training session of Red Rhino's Conduit Wizard. We've shown you how to enter multiple conduit runs. We saw how quickly and efficiently the Conduit Wizard allows you to input materials to estimate multiple conduit runs simultaneously. Conduit Wizard speeds up the estimating process greatly. This is John Kelsey saying goodbye for now. Thank you for joining me in this session of Red Rhino Academy.